Hey, it's Highberry Boy. Welcome to the Stream Elements Custom Chatbox Widget Masterclass. In this video, I'll give you the foundation to start implementing your own chatbox widgets from scratch. We will cover things like how to build a message queue, display and animate messages, simulate events, integrate alerts, and cover gotchas like badges and emotes. So by the end of this video, you'll have everything you need to know to create your own chat boxes from scratch. The final code for this will be on my Gumroad page, and you can use it as a starting template for when you create these chat boxes, so you don't have to go over the boilerplate code every single time. So whether you're building this for your Etsy store, a freelancing gig, or your own stream, do what you want with this, and let's get started. Okay, I have an empty widget here. And the first thing that you need to know is how to get the messages that are going through your stream. We can do that by attaching an on-event received event listener to the DOM, and that will listen for incoming message events. So window.add event listener, and the type is on event received. And we need to pass it a callback function, and that function gets passed an event object every time an event occurs. So first, before we do anything, let's just store the listener, the data, and the event. And that's going to be passed in through the event object. So object.detail.listener. And data will be object.detail.event.data. And the event will just be object.detail.event. Now we need to listen for message events specifically. So if the listener is equal to the string of message, then we can do something. First, we'll check if the data actually exists, because it's good practice to do so. And then we'll construct a message object. In this object, we'll have a username, and we can get that from the data.display name. And we need the text content, data.text. And then we also need to get the badges that the user has, and it could be an empty array if there's no badges, and it could be an empty array if there's no badges. So and then we also want to get the emotes if there's any emotes, and that could also be an empty array if there's no emotes. And let's just console.log the message. Oh, and make sure you actually spell event listener right. Oops. There we go. There's a typo here. Received. Now, if you send a message to your chat and open the Chrome console, Control-Shift-J on Windows, you'll see the object that we logged, the message object. It has the text, the emotes, and badges, as well as the username. Okay, now that we know how to get the messages, the next step would be to display those messages on screen or do something with that message. So let's go over to the HTML and let's create a div with an ID of chat container. And we only need one element because we're going to be creating the message divs on the fly and prepending them to the chat container. So before we go any further with displaying the messages and things like that, we should go over testing the message events. That way you don't have to go back and forth to your Twitch chat and to Stream Elements just to test the widget. So let's go ahead and create a new function called simulate message event. So you can simulate any of the events in Stream Elements. To simulate events, well, first let's store it in a variable so we can use it. And to create events, you just say new custom event. And the first argument is the type. So in our case, it's an on event received. And the second argument is an object with the details of that event. Now, the structure of this must match exactly with the details of the event you're trying to mimic. So it's going to be different for message events, follower events, subscriber events, etc. So let's give it the details. The listener is a message. Next, there's an event. And we need to specify the data for that event. So there's badges, which is an array. There's a display name. There's the text content of the message. And there's the emotes, which is also an array. Now for the badges, you need to pass it an object with a type, a version, a URL, and a description. And you can have multiple badges. So I could have the broadcaster, the subscriber, and the premium badge. And then for emotes, you have the type, name, ID, GIF, animated, the URLs for the emotes, and then the start and end, which is important because this is basically the index of where the emote lies in that string. So we'll need that later when we create the function for that. Okay, and the last thing is you need to dispatch the event that we just created so it fires it off. And that's the entire function for simulating the event. Now we have to trigger the event. So there's a couple ways to do that. You could use a set interval in the widget load listener, or you could create a field button to trigger the messages. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's create a test button, and it's going to be the type of button, and we need to give it a label. This is what it will show up as for the text of the button. We'll do test message and a value, which doesn't really matter in our case. So just leave it empty. And okay, now if I click done, you'll see the button pop up. Now, when you click this button, it's going to fire an event test on our listener. So what we can do is just say if listener is equal to event test, then we'll call our simulate message event function. So if I open my console and I click the test button, you'll see my message events are coming in. So now we can begin actually displaying the messages on the screen. So we'll need a couple functions for that. First, let's create a display chat message function. Let's create a add message to queue. And let's also create a function for processing the queue. Now we're just going to create a simple message queue. One thing to keep in mind is that if you add the widget duration field, that automatically adds the event queue to your widget. The message events are not a part of this. So only like follower latest, subscriber latest, raid, etc. But message events are not part of this. So that's why we're creating our own queue. Okay, and then let's create a couple global variables at the top of our file. Let's create an empty array for the message queue. And let's create a Boolean flag. So we know if the messages are being processed or not. Default to false. And then let's also get a reference to our chat container with documents.getElementById. So when we get a message, we're going to add it to the message queue, and we'll pass it the message object that we constructed. And so we'll need to add that as a parameter to our function. And then we're just going to push it to the message queue array that we created up at the top, the empty array right here. So we'll go ahead and push the message to it. And then we can process the message. So we've called our process queue function. We need to check if the length of the message queue is greater than 0 and there's no messages processing, then we can begin processing a message. So we'll set our is message processing Boolean to true, And we will remove the oldest message from the message queue array using the array shift method. And it'll also store it in the variable. And then we can just pass that message to the display chat message function. And you add message as a parameter to the display chat message function. And we can stop processing. So we'll set the boolean to false. And then the function can just invoke itself. So it just keeps processing the messages until the message queue array length is not greater than 0. And then we'll just console.log the message in the display chat message function so that we know that it's made its way there. So now when we open the Chrome console and we test, and let's make sure we remove other console.logs. Yes, we did. So it's making its way to the display chat message function. It's adding the messages to the queue, removing them, and processing them. So when we receive a message event, it will construct the message object, pass it to the add message to queue function. That will then push the message to the message queue array and call the process queue function. It will then remove the oldest message from the array, display it, and then continue processing until it's reached 0 messages. Okay, let's continue with the display chat message function. So anytime you have text input, it's good practice to use sanitization. And that just means it's going to take the text input and convert any strings or characters that are harmful into a safe equivalent. And this is just to prevent cross-site scripting attacks. Stream Elements provides us with a sanitize method that's available on the global SE API object. So se.api.sanitize. And it's going to take in one argument. That's the text input, which is an object with a property called message. And the value is the message.text that we passed into the function. Now, this is async. So you either have to make this an async function and then use async await, or you can just use promise chaining with .then. And it's going to return a promise object. So we'll just use .then chaining. So we can get back the result. And after we get back the result, we want to do something. So if sanity result.skip, if that is false, that means we passed. If it's true, it means it did not pass the sanitization. So if it passes, let's get the message text back and store it. So message.text is now going to be equal to the sanity result message. So now let's actually get that message displaying on the screen. So we're going to start by creating a message element on the fly and then prepending that to the chat container that we have in our HTML here. So say let message element equal document dot create element, and it's going to be a div. And let's set the inner HTML of the message element. And we'll use a template string. So use the backticks. We'll create a span and we'll just throw in our message text. Oops. Message element dot inner HTML. And let's prepend that to the container. Container dot prepend and pass it the message element. Now, I don't have any styling or anything set up, but we should get the messages on screen. Hello world. Okay, now let's handle the emotes and badges. So we can just do that all in one function. Let's create a function called process message content. Pass it the message. So let's just start with the badges first. So let's create an empty string called badge HTML. And if the badges exist, so if message.badges, and remember this is an array, so we have a length. So if message.badges.length is greater than 0, then we'll do something with the badges. In that case, let's overwrite the empty string and let's map through the badge array and convert each badge into an HTML string with an image tag. So say message.badges.map, and each badge we want to convert that into a string. So we'll use a template string, create an image tag, pass the URL to the source. Let's give it a class, an alt, which will be the badge.description. And then we'll use the string method .join to concatenate these all into a single string. And let's just return the badge HTML. Let's put in an object because we are going to also return the emotes later. Now in our display chat message function, before I set the inner HTML of our message element, let's deconstruct the process message content function to get the badge HTML from it, from the return value. So process message content. Now I can just add another span here. Let's give it the class of badges. And we'll put the badge HTML inside of the span. Okay, now if we test the message, you'll see we have the badges. Now in our CSS, let's define those two classes that it was badges and badge. So we'll do display inline block. We'll do vertical align middle. And for the badge, we'll give it a width and height, 16 pixels. And let's give it margin right, 5 pixels. I'll click done and test, and we'll have the badges the right size. Okay, now we can handle the emotes in the process message content function. So first we're going to check if the emotes exist. So if message.emotes is false, or message.emotes.length is equal to 0, because this is an array, so we can check the length. So if it doesn't exist, we just want to return early. We want to return the badge HTML, and then we want to return the message text with emotes, but it's not going to have the emotes because we're returning early because it doesn't have the emotes, but we have to use the same structure, if that makes sense. Then we're going to sort the emotes array. So we want to sort it so it starts with the emotes with the closest starting value. So we'll sort that. We'll pass it a function with A and B parameters. A.start minus B.start. And that will sort the array for us. And now let's create an empty string to hold the emotes and the message. And we'll create a last index that will be used in our loop. So we'll loop through each of the emotes using a for each loop. So for each emote, first we want to grab a certain subsection of the string and assign it to the result. That way we can add the image at the emote start value in the string. So we'll say result plus equals message dot text dot substring, and we want to start at the last index and end at the emote dot start. So we want to just grab that certain part of the string. Then we can add the image right where the emote starts. So we'll create a template string with an image tag. The source, we'll pass it the image URLs for the emotes. So it's going to be emote.urls. And since we're looping through each one, it's always going to be the first index. We'll give it a class of emote. In an alt, we'll pass in emote.name. Okay, now each time it loops, we need it to add it after the emote ends. So we need to set the last index to emote.end +1 for space. And then we need to add the remaining text that is left. So we'll say result dot plus equals message dot text dot substring, and we're just going to pass it one argument. It'll start at the last index and end at the end of the string. And then finally we can just return, let's return the badge HTML and the message with emotes in an object, and we'll deconstruct that object from the function's return value later. And then we need to deconstruct that from our return value from our function. Let's say message text with emotes. And then I can replace the message.text here in our span with the message text with emotes. Okay, let's continue on with the display chat message function. So first of all, I forgot to add the username. So after the badges, let's add a span with the class of username. And inside that span, let's add the message.username from our message object. Okay, then with our if statement with the sanity result, let's handle if it doesn't pass. So we'll say else, and then is message processing is equal to false. And then let's continue processing the queue. And let's add some error handling with our promise chain. So we'll add a dot catch and we'll just log the error. So console.error, error sanitizing message, and log the error. And then we can also just stop processing and continue processing the queue if there is an error. Now we want to remove the oldest message after a certain amount of messages. So let's create a global variable called max messages. I'm going to set it to like 12. And then going back to the display chat message function, after the prepend, we'll do a check. Container.children.length is greater than max messages. Then we'll remove the child from the container. So container.remove child and pass it the container.firstChild. So that will remove the oldest message after it exceeds 12. Okay, now let's add some animation for our message. So in our HTML at the top, let's add a script. Just Google the JSAP CDN and go ahead and grab that script. This is a animation library called GreenSock. Then we'll create a new function called Animate Message. We'll pass it the message element. Now, because we've added that script, we can start using the JSAP library. And at the top of our file, let's also add another global variable for the duration. We'll set the duration to 10 seconds. Now, all of these constants we have here will be converted to fields that the user can set so that it can be more customizable. But for now, we'll just hard code the values. And we'll just do a simple animation. I want you guys to play around with the animations and use your own styling. We'll go through some CSS, but obviously I want you guys to make it your own. I'm giving you the bare bones kind of templates that you can start with when you make chat widgets that has like all the proper boilerplate that you need. So let's animate the message element. So just JSAP.to. And you guys can look up the documentation on the JSAP library. So we'll pass that message element, and then now we can do the details like the duration, and we're going to be animating the opacity and the scale. So this is what we're animating it to. So in our CSS, we may start with an opacity of 0 and a scale of 0, and the ease to bounce.out. Now we can set a function for when the animation completes. It's the onComplete. So this is our animation when the message comes in, and then the onComplete will do an animation when the message goes out. So do a set timeout. And for that timeout, we'll pass the duration, which is our global variable that we have at the top, is in milliseconds. So if I did 10,000, that would be 10 seconds. So after 10 seconds, we want to animate the message again. So we can just paste this here, and we're going to change the opacity down to 0 and the scale down to 0.5. Since it's being removed, I'm just going to remove the ease. And when it completes, we're just going to remove it from the container. So if container.contains a message element, then we will remove the child message element. Oh, we didn't close this. Oh, and we didn't close the rest of our stuff. There we go. So we're not getting any animation yet because we need to add some styling. So in our display chat message function, after we create the div for the chat message, let's assign a class to it. Message element dot class name is equal to let's do chat message, Now let's define that in the CSS. So we were animating the opacity and the scale. So we need to set those starting values. So for opacity, we'll do 0. And scale, we'll do transform scale 0.5. Okay, and then after we prepend the message, let's animate it. Animate message, and pass it the message element. Now, if I test it, you'll see it's animating in. And when it gets removed, it animates it out. Now, we also want messages to start at the bottom and stack on top of each other instead of starting at the top and going down. So go back to the CSS and we'll add a selector for the body and for the chat container. And we'll add display flex, justify content center, align item center. The height will be 100 VH, which is the whole page. And then we need to give it a flex direction of column reverse and make it a flex container. Now if I click done and I test, so now you'll see the newest message comes in at the bottom and they stack on top of each other. Then we can add things. We had a username class. Let's just make that font weight bold. We can give our chat container a width and height, 400 pix, height 600 pix, overflow hidden, a background color, do RGBA 0, 0, 0, and the opacity 0.2. Give it a border, 2 pix, solid white, and a border radius 10 pix, some padding 10 pix, and some box shadow. Some box shadow 4 pix. You could use a generator for this if you like wanted to see it first, like a box shadow generator. And you could add a Google font. You probably want to keep the body transparent, but for purposes of this tutorial, I'll add a background so you can actually see that that's the body. And let's see it and test it. Definitely want a different font. Like, it's pretty ugly. So in the HTML, I'm just going to add a style sheet to the Google font Shivo Mono. And in the CSS, I'll go over to the body and add a font family. And I want it all to be Shivo Mono. And I could play around with the text size and stuff, but that's a little bit better. I want to add, so let's add some styling to our chat message. Give it some padding, margin 5 pix 0, background color 0, 0, 0, 0.7. Give it a color of white for the text. Let's also give this a border. 2 pix solid white, and the border radius 5 pix. And that should be good for now. Much better. Okay, so now we can move on to like the last thing pretty much, which is integrating the alerts. So like when somebody follows, subscribes, raids, etc., then we want that to pop in the chat, not just the messages. And then another thing before we move on, you don't have to remove the messages if you don't want to. Instead, you could do something like set it to local storage using the SC API global object. If you wanted to like save the messages so that if you closed out and then you came back to the chat, the messages would still be there. But moving on for now, let's create a new function for the integrated alerts. So we'll call it display event message. And we're going to pass in the event and also the event type, so that we can discern what type of event it is and then display the proper HTML. So it's going to be very similar to our display chat message function. We're going to create a div on the fly and then prepend it to the chat container. Only difference is we need to discern what type of event it is so that we can display the proper text in the HTML and whatnot. So let's go ahead and start creating a div on the fly. Document dot create element div, and we'll assign a class to it in case we want to do different styling for the events, different events. Do message or event message. And we'll create an empty string to hold the event message. And we'll use a switch statement, and then we'll assign the proper HTML to the event message based on what event type it is. So do switch, pass it the event type. And our first case will be the follower latest event. If it's a follower latest event, then we'll assign a certain set of HTML to the event message, specifically for the follower latest event. So let's start with an image tag for the badges, class of badge, source tag. And this is a template string, so we can pass in variables to it. So we want the event.avatar. Let's give it an alt. Pass in event.display name. And we'll say display names avatar. And we'll create another span. Give a class of username. This will hold the username. Pass in event.display name. Close the span. Then we'll add a space and be sp semicolon as followed. And then break. Because if it's a follower latest event, then we don't want to run any more of the cases. Now we'll do the same for each type of event. So let's copy and paste. We'll cover 5 different types of events. Second one will be subscriber latest. Third one is cheer latest. Fourth is tip latest. And last we'll do raid latest. And then we'll default to return. Okay, now we need to modify each HTML template string for each case. So the follower latest is already set. Subscriber is going to be nearly the same, except for we'll change it to has subscribed. Now for cheer, tip, and raid, we need the amount. So we'll take that off and say cheered, and then we'll pass in the amount. Event.amount. It's, since it's a cheer. Okay, and then for tipped, we'll do tipped and also the amount. And then for latest, we'll do rated with the amount of viewers. Okay, after our switch statement, we'll then assign the event message to the inner HTML of our message element. Message element.inner HTML is equal to event message. So it'll assign the appropriate template string to the event message, and then we'll set that as the inner HTML. And then we're going to prepend that to our container, pass it the message element. We can reuse our animate message function to animate it. And then we'll also add that same check to remove it if it exceeds the max messages. So container.children.length is greater than max messages. And container.remove child container.first child. So to test that, we also need to simulate an event. So we'll simulate a follower event, and it's going to be very similar to our simulate message event. So we'll create a new function for that called simulate follower event. And we've already gone over how to do this before. You create a new custom event and you have to pass it the exact details of that type of event. And then you have to dispatch the event on the window. So this is what it looks like for our follower event that's on the on event received listener. So now we need to go back down to our listener, and we need to also simulate the follower event when the button is clicked, as well as the we'll also simulate the message event. And then last, we need to actually call the display event message function when those events occur. So on our on event receive listener, First, we're listening for the test, and then we're listening for the message. We can also say else if. We'll have an array in here, and then pass it each event type that we want to check. And then we'll use the array method .includes, and we'll pass it the listener to check if the listener is equal to any of those. So if our listener equals one of these events and the event exists, then we'll display the event message. We'll pass it the event and the event type, which is our listener. Sorry, this else if is in the wrong place. It's not after the if data, it's after the if listener. Don't mix that up. Now it'll say has followed. Now let's add some CSS for that. We add the event message class. Give it a display, flex, align items, center, adding 10 pixels, margin 5 pixels 0, background color RGBA 0.7 opacity, color for text is white, border. Let's do 2 pixels solid white, border radius 5 pixels, opacity 0 because we are animating this one as well, and the transform scale 0.5 for the animation as well. That's the starting values. And done and test. Here we go. So now let's add fields for those global variables. So in your fields, add a max messages and duration that's the type of number. Set a default value and the label. Make sure you don't have a semicolon here, here, or here. Otherwise it'll break. Or not a semicolon, a comma. And then instead of hard coding the values for your global variables, just assign it to the field template. And let's also add another event listener for when the widget loads on widget load. And let's change these to let so that we can reassign them. And then we can set the duration and the max messages. So max messages is equal to parse float and then max messages, which is the field we created. And we'll do the same for the duration. And one other thing I'm going to do is make this async. I'm going to check if we're in editor mode using the global SE API object get overlay status method. We'll await that promise. And if we are in editor mode, then we'll use set interval to simulate the events. So we don't have to keep clicking the message if you don't want to. And make sure to close that. Then we check. Now we can edit this. So let's say we want it to do it every 1 second. Now it will delete it every 1 second. So that's how you can convert those into fields. And I can also set the max messages. So let's say 2 and set this back to 10 seconds. Now it will only allow 2 messages at a time. And that about covers everything I wanted to in this video. If you have any questions, let me know what else you guys want to cover. See you next time. Peace.